I think the problem is PR in the past has certainly suffered from a situation of people doing things they like to do, talking to editors they personally liked rather than necessarily publications they thought were influential. And I think there's a lot you can do around measurement. Now, the reality is the measurement you can do for PR is much more limited compared to the measurement you can do on paid advertising on Google or LinkedIn or something like that. There are certainly limits, but what you should be doing in PR and what people fail to do is set objectives.
He bought a PR marketing agency, and 3 weeks later, the dot-com crash happened, and he lost half his clientele. But here's the thing. Not only did the business not go under, Mike Maynard didn't let anybody go from his team. Instead, he was able to keep the agency afloat by using his background as an engineer and emphasizing the importance of measurement when it comes to PR marketing campaigns. If you're thinking about a career change or thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, this is the episode for you. Special thanks to B2B Pod Pros for making this podcast possible. If you want to generate high quality leads for a SaaS company through B2B podcast sponsorships, head to our website to learn more. Okay, let's jump into the conversation with Mike. Mike, welcome to Innovators Can Laugh. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast, Eric.
I don't think I've ever had somebody with a drastic career change as you, because you used to be an engineer, and then now you're like this PR marketing agency owner. So I thought we'd start there. And why did you leave engineering and jump into PR?
I didn't actually leave engineering and jump into PR. So I left engineering and effectively moved into technical sales first. And I did that because I realized I was quite good at understanding technology and quite bad at being an engineer. An engineer is a lot about detail and getting things right and getting things complete. And that kind of real hard work that engineers have to do, I wasn't great at, to be honest. So I moved into technical sales and I ultimately was running a technical sales team in Europe for a semiconductor company. I realized that in terms of career progression, I had a couple of options. I could go full on into sales rather than the technical support side. I could move to the States where there were some opportunities, or I could move into marketing. So that's what drove my move into marketing. I don't really want to be just a salesperson. I like the technology bit. I love talking about technology. And at the time I was a young family, I didn't want to move to the States. So that was the last option after I ruled out the other two.
Okay, did you take a marketing role somewhere with the company, or did you just jump into an acquisition and buying your own agency?
Oh, that's a great question. No, I actually moved into a marketing role. Marketing role opened up in the company I was working for. Loved the company I was working for. And so moved into doing European marketing for the next 5 years, actually. And then the agency I was using actually came up for sales. The founders wanted to retire. And the classic thing, I like the agency so much, I decided to buy it.
That is so bizarre that the agency you're working with, you like them so much, and so the opportunity came. What did that deal structure look like?
So the deal itself was a little bit of money up front and then payment out over 3 years based on performance. And that's good and bad. The good thing is that actually you both want the payments to be quite high because you want performance to be great. From that point of view, the bad thing is, of course, if performance really is great, then you can be in trouble and you have to pay potentially more than you wanted.
Yeah. Now, how did you introduce yourself to the clients you were basically taking over?
That was fairly easy. That seemed to be a relatively straightforward thing to do. I've met some of the clients at events that the agency had held. And so going to meet clients and saying, I've made this move, a lot of them were like, you seem a bit crazy. But really at the time as well, it was a turbulent time in technology. And I think that also had a significant impact on taking over the agency and what happened.
Now, what was going on with your family? You said you had a family, or did you have like small kids at the time, or what did that look like?
Yes, I had at the time I had one kid who was about 2 years old, and actually within a year I had another child. So 2 boys, great kids. Now obviously not kids anymore, massively grown up. But yeah, so there was quite a lot of pressure with a young family to make this work. Financially, it did seem to be, it did feel quite stressful.
Was there a lot of employees at the agency? I imagine it was a smaller agency, but how many overhead? What was that like?
Yes, at the time there was about 7 people, relatively small agency. We had a decent freelance network of writers and translators we used quite a lot because we were working across Europe, but the agency itself was not big.
Okay. And your company, did they think you were crazy when you told them the news that you were leaving?
I think lots of people thought it was a crazy move. I think People understood. The company actually sent me on a management development course a little bit before I bought the agency. I was on this course, and I remember the last night, you have a dinner, you have a few drinks, and someone said to me, you should run your own business, Mike. And I'm pretty sure what they meant was, I never, ever want to be your boss. And they were just trying to say it in a really nice way. But I took it on, and I think I'd always fancied trying to run a business and seeing how it worked. And whilst I hadn't really talked about that in the company, I think people recognized that was something that I felt I had to try.
Yeah. Isn't it crazy how somebody can say like one little comment and it changes like the trajectory of your journey because it sticks in your mind? I started this podcast because someone said, you should launch a podcast. And it just stuck with me. And I thought, you know what, why not?
Absolutely. I think it's not something that was completely a new thought to me, but it was fact somebody said that. And then literally a month or two later, I got approached by, and actually it was a person I worked directly with, so my account manager at the agency, who said, look, the agency's going up for sale. I think you should buy it. I thought, how can it be to run an agency?
Okay, tell us about that. What were some of the initial obstacles when you got your feet wet? Like, how did you come in and have this new vision, or did you just come in and figure out, let me just learn what's going on first?
I think it comes down to the great Mike Tyson business quote, which is everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. I had a plan, and what I'd seen, and frankly what the owners had seen, was they were very much an older style of PR agency. They were driven a lot by entertainment, particularly of journalists. It was very much print, trade, media focused. And the world was changing. The world was going digital. I could see that was happening. And so there was a big plan to come in and make everything digital and win loads of extra business because we're doing all sorts of cool digital stuff. Unfortunately, timing is really important as well. One of the things that I never learned on my MBA, they really should have said, is that you can do whatever, but if your timing's wrong, there's going to be a problem. I walked into the day I was supposed to sign, the accountant who'd given me advice on buying the agency tried to buy the agency from under me, so we had all sorts of issues there. Ended up in court with him, won in court, it was all good, but all credit to the owners of the agency. They said, no, we've been talking to you. It did wobble for a bit, but then eventually they said, we've been talking to you. We need to go through with our promises. We need to make good on our promises, and you're the person we want to sell to. They were very honourable about how they did business, and I really respected that. So I walked into the business having got over this first challenge, and then literally about 3 weeks after I started, the dot-com crash hit, and we were an agency that was all in on tech companies. We had a lot of companies that were selling into communication systems. It was the hot trend, the AI. 2001 was comms and fibre, and that business just vanished overnight. So pretty much we lost the best part of 50% of our business almost within the first couple of months. That was tough.
Did you have to let some people go? Because
we didn't let people go at that time. And in fact, we've had very few people who've actually had to leave the business because of financial issues. Over the years, we really haven't laid people off. We've tried to look after people, and it's worked with us. It was such a small team, it was really hard to let one person go because they were the one person doing X, and that was going to cause a problem. We held on to people. We also totally believed the market would change. Having worked in semiconductors, particularly through the late 80s and 90s, the industry was very cyclical at the time. There was roughly a 3-year cycle, and you went from boom to bust. Each one lasted about 18 months. And I really believe that was going to happen. Ironically, since then, the industry has not been quite so predictable in terms of its cycles. They're still seeing some cycles, but it's not so predictable. Maybe that was naivety, maybe it was stupidity, I don't know. But we just decided this business is coming back, and we're going to tough it out, and we did.
Okay, Mike, at this time, you buy this business. A few weeks later, the dot-com crash happens. Half your clients go away. You've got this new baby, another one on the way, or at least pretty soon. You left this job that was a steady paycheck. How are you managing your stress at this time? Because a lot of business owners and founders probably find themselves in the same position. And I'm just curious, what did you do to just remain calm and still push forward?
I probably didn't remain calm. I think if you talk to people there, there was a lot of stress. I probably didn't do it very well. It was incredibly stressful. And I think one of the things looking back is it's very clear that the experience scarred me and scarred the rest of the people in the agency. We ended up running the agency on an incredibly conservative basis. So we were incredibly careful. We built up cash reserves. We didn't invest money. We wanted to put money in the bank. And we got the agency to a situation where it was really secure, but frankly, from 2001 through to pretty much 2010, we barely grew. And we stayed as we were, and we were making money. Don't get me wrong, the business was profitable, but we weren't investing to grow. Those 9 years were really heavily influenced by what happened in 2000 when I bought the business, we had to go, look, this is survival. All that matters is survival. And to some extent, that mentality impacted what we did going forward. Certainly hurt us in terms of the good times. We didn't grow very quickly in the good times. And in the bad times, we tended to shrink less. We tended to be much more stable than other agencies, but in the long term, less successful.
Okay. I read in your bio, it said, as an engineer, you believe in combining measurement, accountability, and innovation. How does that transfer over to some of the PR and marketing campaigns that you do for clients?
I actually lectured for a few years on PR, and my favorite thing to do was lecture on measurement and walk in and go, I can tell you the one thing you can do that's going to make you more attractive to employers, and none of you are going to want to do it. And everyone sat there going, no, we will. Because young people at university, they're actually super keen, they're super smart, learn Excel. And like everyone, you could see their faces fall. It was like, I'm not doing that. I think the problem is PR in the past has certainly suffered from a situation of people doing things they like to do, talking to editors they personally liked rather than necessarily publications they thought were influential. And I think there's a lot you can do around measurement. Now, the reality is the measurement you can do for PR is much more limited compared to the measurement you can do on paid advertising on Google or LinkedIn or something like that. There are certainly limits, but what you should be doing in PR and what people fail to do is set objectives. And I think that this is super important. PR people, they go in and they go, yeah, let's just try and push this story out and do the best we can. But actually, if you set objectives and say, I want this story to be covered in this publication, I want it to say this, and you have an idea of what that perfect result would be, and you aim for it, I think then you can measure. And you can measure against what you'd hoped for. Some of it is measuring how well did you run the campaign. Some of it is measuring how well did you set the KPIs. So in the early days, you'll set KPIs that are way off and you'll get it wrong. But I think if you keep doing that, you'll learn and you can be a little bit more data driven. And that really helps going forward.
Yeah, I totally agree, Mike. Back in the day, I used to work for this boutique agency and we bought online ads for American Express. And we got the cost per acquisition from $1,300 down to around $150. You want to know how?
Go on.
Through Excel. I learned how to do pivot tables in a class I was taking, and I brought that to the agency, and I was able to slice and dice how we were running the media. And I'm like, you know what? These other ad formats don't really work. Let's put the majority in pop-ups. And before you knew it, American Express, instead of giving us $50,000 a month to advertise for them, I was writing insertion orders for $1 million, Mike, because of pivot tables. So you're spot on about that.
And simply doing the analysis and finding out what worked, what didn't, and stop doing what doesn't work.
Now, how do you approach what you do when it comes to measuring? Can you give an example, like measuring a campaign? You talked a little bit about the KPIs, but give us examples, or what are some KPIs that companies should be looking at?
A lot of companies really care about getting a broad reach of coverage. One of our clients, Microchip, they're one of the leading microcontroller companies. They've literally shipped billions of these microcontrollers, and they're everywhere. They're in all sorts of bits of electronic equipment you wouldn't imagine. They care about getting their message out broadly. They're looking to make sure that they hit across different countries. They get a good balance of coverage. They don't want all the European coverage in the UK and nothing in Germany, because Germany is a super important market for them. They also want to make sure that they hit across different topics. They want to make sure that their different business units, they all get a coverage representative of their opportunity. So they slice and dice the coverage analysis in all sorts of different ways, really to make sure that they're not appearing to be successful, but it's simply because of one particular release absolutely blew up and went crazy and everything else was disappointing. So they're looking to make sure that they push that bar up at the bottom and really get coverage across the board. And that's a great, sensible strategy for them. It makes sense. They're a very broad company. They offer a lot of products. Really good approach. At the other end, we had a client come to us a few years ago and they said, we want to get coverage in a national newspaper in the UK. And we said, you do realize that your product is software that does floor planning for data centers. National newspapers don't talk about floor planning for data centers. We don't care. Warning. We're like, these guys have gone nuts. So anyway, we came up with a strategy where we basically built something around a careers piece and careers in data centers and how that was important. And then we built the client in and it worked really well. And we got the coverage and it went into, I think it was the Times or the Telegraph, really good coverage, excellent coverage. But we're still like, is this really going to move the needle? Are data center professionals really big readers of this publication? And are they thinking about their job when they're reading it? And we're like, oh, this is weird. And then about a month and a half later, suddenly there was an announcement of a big trade sale. And it was quite clear they had no interest in actually reaching their customers with this content. They wanted to reach the financial community. And they knew that they couldn't talk about what they were trying to do. They wanted to get attention in the financial community. And hopefully what we did helped a little bit to make that deal work and get them a good press and all the rest of it. I think there's two completely different examples of how companies look at coverage and what they want to achieve, but both of them driven by really sensible, thoughtful goals that actually ultimately move the needle in terms of their business.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me about pitches, getting new business. Do you have a memorable pitch, something you potential client?
Oh, we have pitches that are burned in my brain from going wrong. So I think it's interesting. In our industry, we're very focused on super deep tech companies. So they're like making semiconductors and things like that. And I think what happens is the pitches that go wrong, you don't think about the client. In some ways, it's much easier to understand a client if you're in food marketing for consumers, because they're all somewhat similar and all trying to do the same thing. The pitches that work well are the pitches we go into and we say, look, we've read your brief. Here's what we'd do. And this is why we'd do it. And this is why we think it's going to work. And generally speaking, if you can go in and pitch and present a strategy as though you were coming in as a CMO, you tend to do really well. Sometimes you get it wrong. And for sure, we've gone in and said, this is what we do, this is why we'll do it. At the end of the pitch, the potential clients very gently said, yeah, that's not going to work. And here's why it's not going to work. Actually, very occasionally we win those pitches because they still like the creative approach. But more often than not, you've not been able to prove that you've really understood that client. So I think it's about building that understanding of a client, really showing them what we can do. There was one client we worked with for a while, and they were ultimately looking to get bought through a trade sale. Our whole goal was to make them appear more important than they were. So really build that industry awareness. And we met the company that ultimately acquired them. We met them at a trade show and we were chatting to them. And one of them said, we just can't believe how small this company is. We thought they were like 5 times the size. All they're doing, all of this or that is absolutely incredible. And we're like, yes, that's a win.
Okay, before we get into rapid fire questions, one more question. What is one of your weaknesses in terms of being an owner and being a leader for your team?
Not delegating. My team will scream if I don't say that. Yeah, it's something that I'm still working on. I'm still trying to get better. Just envy the people who are able to go and delegate work out and not get pulled down into the weeds. And I'm continually doing that. That's clearly my biggest weakness. And that saves you a million emails from my team telling you that I'd lied if I said anything else.
Anything that you're trying to do to overcome that?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I am trying to do is, particularly on vacations, being European, we get vacations, right? It's great if there's American listeners here. May not be a strategy for you. I know you guys work super hard, but yeah, vacations, I really am trying to switch off. And that's not to say I won't check my email. Of course I'll check my email. But I really am trying to actually stop doing things. I've just been for a week in California, had an absolutely fantastic holiday, had one call the whole week. Again, not quite delegated at all. There's still that one call to move on from, but pretty much that was it. And then just a little bit of email triage. So I think that's really helping me do that. But it's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, when people ask me what's the biggest difference that you've had from leaving the States and moving to Europe, I tell them it's vacation, that Europeans take vacation very seriously. In fact, they don't even work. Most of them don't even work when they're on vacation. And I tell my American friends, can you believe that? Isn't that crazy? I relaxed a little bit more. Now when I'm on vacation, I work maybe at the most 2 hours a day. But yeah, it's true. Americans, even when we're on vacation, we're still working for the most part.
That's crazy. Europeans typically won't check their emails. We have whole systems internally where we actually get someone else to step in and check people's email when they're on vacation. It's obviously important to be available as an agency, but actually, and here's something for you Americans to know, it doesn't have to be you personally. If you're on vacation, you can let someone else take over and run with your clients or run with your works. It's something that I think Europeans have probably got fairly right. I still have trouble with some of the countries that take an entire month off. That's still a bit too far for me. I don't think I could do that, but a week or two off for sure. I think people should take a week or two off, and they should feel, certainly if they're not running a business, able not to read email.
Yeah, my sister-in-law used to work, or no, she still does, for a French company. And I feel like she gets 2 months off because the entire month of August, she's really not working. Yeah. And then she still has like other 5 weeks of vacation. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Rapid fire time. Give me the first thing that pops into your head. Are you ready? Okay. The craziest thing I ever did to make money or save money was.
That's a good one. The craziest thing I ever did to make money was to set up a company to design electronics for the rock music industry. It was crazy, and it made literally no money.
Okay, best advice your mom, your dad, or someone close to you ever gave you?
I think the best advice I got, and it's something I keep saying to people, is that ideas are easy and execution is difficult. My dad used to phrase it slightly differently and slightly more direct. He was a big sportsman, played a lot of cricket, and he was just like, you've just got to go out and do it. So that's all that matters. Thinking you're going to do it or imagining it doesn't matter. Just ideas are easy, but execution is really hard.
Yeah, so true. Last question for you. I grew up in blank, and my favorite thing about that city is blank.
Wow. I grew up in Felixstowe. My favorite thing about the city, which is everyone in Felixstowe is going to hate me, is the wind. It's on the east coast of England. It's incredibly windy to the point that, like where I live now, people say, oh, this is unbelievably dangerous wind. I'm like, is it windy? So you get these really strong breezes, and I actually really like them. Yeah, I miss that strong breeze. And particularly now, it's super hot in the UK, and I could really do with a breeze where I am now, and there's no breeze.
Yeah. All right. Mike, thank you for coming on the show. I will put show links to your LinkedIn as well as your agency in the show notes. It's just been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thanks so much, Eric. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah. And for those listening, I'll be back next week. Until then, this is Eric signing off. Cheers.